They called themselves merchants. They dressed in the robes of respectability. But in the final days of the 13th century, François Grimaldi and his cousin Rainier walked toward the gates of a fortress perched on a limestone rock jutting into the Mediterranean Sea, and beneath their humble disguises, they carried weapons. The date was January 8th, 1301. The fortress was called Monaco. And what happened that night would transform a family of ambitious Genoese exiles into one of Europe's most enduring royal dynasties, a lineage that would survive 6 centuries of wars, revolutions, and near extinction to remain in power to this day. The story begins not with kings or nobles, but with outcasts. The Grimaldis were Guelphs, partisans of the Pope in the bitter civil war that tore through the Italian city-states of the medieval world. Genoa, their home, had chosen the opposing side, the Ghibellines, loyal to the Holy Roman Emperor. When the Ghibellines seized control of the city in 1295, the Grimaldi family found themselves banished, stripped of their wealth, their property confiscated, their name cursed in the streets where they had once held power. Exile was not merely a political inconvenience, it was erasure. And for men like François Grimaldi, erasure was unacceptable. The Mediterranean in those years was a chessboard of fortified ports, each one controlling vital trade routes between Europe, North Africa, and the East. Monaco was small, barely more than a strategic watchtower, but it belonged to Genoa, and it commanded the coastline. François understood that possession of this rock would give his family leverage, a foothold, a future. So he and Rainier devised a plan that would become legend. Disguised as Franciscan monks, they approached the gates in the darkness, humble travelers seeking shelter. The guards, seeing only robes and rosaries, opened the doors. Within moments, the Grimaldis drew their swords. Their men, hidden nearby, stormed the fortress. By dawn, Monaco belonged to the family that would never let it go. This was not a romantic conquest. It was a calculated act of survival by a family with nowhere else to turn. And it worked. The Grimaldis fortified the rock, turned it into a base, and began what can only be described as a campaign of maritime opportunism. They raided Ghibelline ships. They disrupted enemy supply lines. They took what they needed and defended what they claimed. Some historians soften the language, calling them privateers. Others are more direct. The Grimaldis, in those early decades, were pirates. But piracy alone does not build a kingdom. What distinguished the Grimaldis was their ability to adapt, to negotiate, to shift allegiances when survival demanded it. In 1331, they lost Monaco to Genoa after a siege. For years, the family scattered, regrouping in exile once more, plotting their return. In 1341, they took it back, then lost it again. Then took it again in 1419, this time securing it through a combination of military force and strategic marriage alliances that bound them to the powerful houses of France and Italy. By the 15th century, the Grimaldis were no longer raiders, they were lords. Monaco itself remained precarious. The principality was barely 3 square kilometers, a sliver of rock surrounded by larger, hungrier powers. France pressed from the west. The Italian states jostled from the east. Spain hovered in the distance, its influence spreading across the Mediterranean. Any misstep could mean absorption, annexation, extinction. The Grimaldis survived by making themselves indispensable. They offered their port to allies. They married their daughters to influential families. They cultivated neutrality when neutrality served them, and took sides when alliance offered protection. It was a balancing act that required not just ambition, but ruthless pragmatism. In 1512, the family faced one of its darkest crises. Lucien Grimaldi, the reigning lord, was assassinated by his brother Jean, who seized power in a bloody coup. Jean ruled for 13 years before he too was murdered by his nephew Bartolomeo. The cycle of internal violence threatened to destroy the dynasty from within. But the Grimaldis, even in chaos, understood the importance of continuity. Bartolomeo restored order, fortified the succession, and ensured that Monaco would pass intact to the next generation. The family's survival instinct, honed over centuries of exile and conflict, had become its defining trait. The 16th and 17th centuries brought new dangers. Monaco became a vassal state, first of Spain and then of France. The Grimaldis retained their titles, their symbols, their autonomy in name, but in practice they governed at the pleasure of greater powers. In 1641, Honoré II negotiated a treaty with France that recognized Monaco as a protectorate. The principality would maintain its sovereignty, but French troops would guarantee its defense. It was a compromise that grated against pride, but ensured survival. The Grimaldis had learned long ago that pride without power was a luxury they could not afford. Yet even under French protection, the family faced catastrophe. In 1731, the male line of the Grimaldi ended with the death of Antoine I, who left no sons. The succession passed to his daughter, Louise Hippolyte, who ruled for less than a year before her death. Her husband, Jacques de Goyon-Matignon, assumed control, and to preserve the dynasty's name, he took the Grimaldi surname. It was an extraordinary decision, one that broke with centuries of patrilineal tradition. But it kept the name alive. The Grimaldis, even when their bloodline faltered, refused to disappear. The French Revolution brought the family to the brink of annihilation. In 1793, revolutionary forces annexed Monaco, abolished the principality, and imprisoned Honoré III in Paris. The Grimaldi estates were seized. Their wealth was confiscated. For 22 years, Monaco ceased to exist as an independent entity. The family, scattered and dispossessed, survived in exile once more, waiting for the political tides to shift. And shift they did. In 1814, after the fall of Napoleon, the Treaty of Paris restored Monaco to the Grimaldi. The family returned to a principality diminished in territory, but intact in spirit. The 19th century posed a different kind of challenge. Monaco was impoverished, its economy stagnant, its future uncertain. In 1848, the towns of Menton and Roquebrune, comprising 95% of Monaco's territory, revolted and declared independence, seeking annexation by Sardinia. The Grimaldis were left with a fraction of their former lands and almost no revenue. Florestan I, the reigning prince, faced a choice: fade into irrelevance or reinvent the principality entirely. His son Charles III chose reinvention. In 1863, Charles opened a casino in Monte Carlo, a district carved from the rocky slopes of the principality. The idea was not entirely original. Other European resorts had gambling houses. But Charles marketed Monaco as a haven for the wealthy, a place where the rules were lenient, the scenery spectacular, and discretion assured. The casino became the economic engine of the principality. Revenue poured in. Monaco abolished income tax for its residents. The population grew. The family that had once survived through raids and alliances now thrived through tourism and finance. The transformation was profound. Within 2 decades, Monaco went from a struggling backwater to a destination that attracted European nobility, wealthy industrialists, and adventurers seeking fortune at the gaming tables. Charles negotiated the construction of a railway line connecting Monaco to the French rail network, making the principality accessible to visitors from Paris, London, and beyond. The architecture changed. Grand hotels rose along the coastline, gardens were planted, streets were paved. The medieval fortress was renovated into a palace worthy of hosting dignitaries. Monaco was being rebuilt not as a military stronghold, but as a symbol of elegance and prosperity. But prosperity brought new vulnerabilities. The casino made Monaco wealthy, but it also made the principality dependent on a single industry. Economic downturns, shifts in public taste, or changes in gambling laws elsewhere could threaten the entire foundation of the state. The Grimaldis understood this danger. They began diversifying, slowly at first, investing in infrastructure, encouraging commerce, and positioning Monaco as more than just a gambling resort. They wanted legitimacy, recognition as a true sovereign state, rather than a curiosity on the map of Europe. The early 20th century tested this ambition. World War I brought economic disruption. Monaco's position as a neutral enclave made it attractive to refugees and exiles, but it also drew suspicion from both France and Italy, each wary of espionage and intrigue operating from within the principality's borders. Prince Albert I, who ruled from 1889 to 1922, was a scholar and oceanographer, more interested in scientific exploration than political maneuvering. He founded the Oceanographic Museum, conducted deep-sea expeditions, and published extensively on marine biology. His reign gave Monaco a reputation for intellectual pursuits, but it did little to address the underlying question of the principality's long-term viability. When Louis II inherited the throne in 1922, he faced a Monaco still uncertain of its place in the modern world. The casino remained profitable, but the surrounding political landscape was shifting. Fascism rose in Italy. Instability gripped France. The Treaty of Versailles had redrawn borders and alliances, and Monaco's survival depended on maintaining good relations with its powerful neighbor to the west. Louis navigated these challenges with caution, avoiding entanglements while quietly modernizing Monaco's legal and administrative structures. Then came World War II. In June 1940, France fell to Nazi Germany, and Monaco found itself surrounded by Axis-controlled territory. Louis declared neutrality, but neutrality in wartime is always conditional. Italian forces occupied the Principality in 1942, followed by German troops in 1943 after Italy's surrender to the Allies. Louis, aging and in poor health, tried to protect his subjects from deportation and forced labor, negotiating where he could, acquiescing where he had no choice. The records suggest he intervened on behalf of Monaco's small Jewish population, though the full extent of his actions remains debated among historians. What is clear is that Monaco emerged from the war intact, its sovereignty preserved, its people largely spared the horrors that engulfed much of Europe. Rainier III ascended the throne in 1949 at the age of 26. He inherited a principality that needed radical transformation if it was to survive the second half of the 20th century. The casino, while still profitable, was aging. Monaco's economy was narrow. The population was small. Rainier saw that Monaco's future lay not in preserving the past, but in embracing modernity while maintaining the symbols of continuity that gave the principality its identity. He began an ambitious program of expansion and development, reclaiming land from the sea to increase Monaco's territory, constructing high-rise buildings to accommodate a growing population, and attracting international businesses with favorable tax policies. The marriage to Grace Kelly in 1956 was more than a royal wedding. It was a masterstroke of public relations. Grace brought Hollywood glamour to a European principality, and the global media attention turned Monaco into a household name. Suddenly, Monaco was not just a footnote in European history, but a symbol of romance, wealth, and sophistication. Tourists arrived in greater numbers. Real estate values soared. The principality's profile rose dramatically. But the marriage also brought pressure. The world watched Monaco more closely. Questions about tax policy, about the legitimacy of the Grimaldi rule, about whether Monaco was a genuine state or a legal fiction, circulated in international forums. Rainier responded by strengthening Monaco's institutions. He reformed the constitution in 1962, establishing a national council with elected representatives while retaining significant executive power for the prince. He diversified the economy, encouraging banking, finance, and light industry. He invested in cultural institutions, building museums, theaters, and concert halls. He understood that legitimacy in the modern world required more than hereditary titles. It required results, prosperity, and the appearance of democratic participation, even within a monarchical framework. Grace's death in a car accident in 1982 was a personal tragedy for Rainier and a symbolic loss for Monaco. She had become synonymous with the principality's image, and her sudden absence left a void that was difficult to fill. Rainier continued to govern, but the dynamism of the earlier decades slowed. He remained on the throne until his death in 2005, having ruled for 56 years, one of the longest reigns in European history. He transformed Monaco from a curiosity into a recognized member of the international community, securing membership in the United Nations, the Council of Europe, and numerous international organizations. Albert II inherited a principality vastly different from the one his father had taken over in 1949. Monaco was now a financial hub, a real estate jewel, a destination for the ultra-wealthy. But it also faced new challenges. Environmental concerns, particularly regarding marine conservation, became central to Albert's reign. He positioned himself as an advocate for ocean protection, continuing his great-great-grandfather's legacy of oceanography. He addressed questions about Monaco's banking secrecy laws, cooperating with international efforts to combat money laundering and tax evasion. He worked to modernize Monaco's image, presenting it not as a relic of the past, but as a forward-looking micro-state capable of adapting to the demands of the 21st century. The succession question loomed large. For centuries, the Grimaldis had survived close calls, moments when the male line nearly ended, when the family name almost disappeared. Albert married in 2011, and the birth of his twins in 2014 ensured another generation. The family coat of arms, with its two monks holding swords, remains the symbol of the principality, a reminder of the night in 1301 when François Grimaldi seized a fortress and set in motion a dynasty that has endured for more than 700 years. The Grimaldi story defies easy categorization. They were not conquerors who built vast empires. They were not philosophers who shaped intellectual movements. They were not revolutionaries who overturned old orders. They were survivors, masters of adaptation, rulers who understood that power is not static but fluid, that survival requires constant negotiation between ambition and pragmatism. They held a rock in the Mediterranean and turned it into a sovereign state, not through grand victories, but through patience, calculation, and an unshakable refusal to disappear. In a world where dynasties rise and fall with regularity, where revolutions erase centuries of tradition overnight, the Grimaldis remain. That alone is an achievement worth remembering.